Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to be able to share together. And no, I don't have a Kiwi accent, but I think I'm old enough that if I stayed here long enough, I still wouldn't have a Kiwi accent. I think I'm an American, and it's going to be an American accent for the rest of my life. In heaven, I don't know. We're told it's supposed to be Spanish. But some people here might think it will be Tagalog. We will see. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to share together. And well, let me start with a story. Well, let me tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll dive into a story. I'm Mark Sandoval. I come from the United States. My background is emergency medicine. I'm trained in medicine through Loma Linda University, and I did my emergency medicine training in Michigan, and then worked for a while in urgent care and emergency medicine there. And then we transitioned to the mission field, to Trinidad and Tobago, and spent about 3 years, 2.5 years there working at the hospital, where I did also family practice and ran the ICU for a while. So I'm familiar with critical care. I'm familiar with outpatient management and then also family practice, so where you have patients coming back and forth and so on. And then it was while I was in Trinidad that I recognized, now that I was doing family practice and I had patients that were coming to me again and again, that when they had their diabetes, then I would give them, the particularly recommended medication for that, and then they'd come back 6 months later, and then I'd have to increase their medication or just monitor, and sometimes adding new medications onto it, and the patients just kept coming back and kept coming back with the same problems. And I came to the conclusion, I'm not fixing anything. And I went into medicine to help people. And if I'm not fixing anything, then I want to know something else. And so about the same time as well, there was a radio station that was wanting medical or health programming for the radio station, and they asked our hospital to be involved, and the hospital asked me to be involved. And as an emergency physician, I wasn't sure what I'm going to teach on the radio. How to suture a laceration, how to reduce a dislocated shoulder, how to stabilize somebody with a gunshot wound. I mean, those are all things that I knew, but I didn't know how do you relate that on a radio? And so I thought, okay, well, what do I do? And I realized, well, I should probably teach about health. And then I had an aha moment. I don't know anything about health. I know about disease. I know about trauma. I know about illness. I don't know about health. And that was kind of a wake-up moment for me. And so in order to put together the information for the radio program, I had to start learning for myself outside of my medical school education, and to then start pursuing what health looked like. And so I started reading about nutrition, and I started reading about exercise and other lifestyle factors, and so that I could then teach it on the radio. And sometimes I would be reading my notes while my wife was driving us to the radio station so that I could be able to present, and it was interesting. That began a growth phase, and I realized that I needed to switch from a practice that was educate to medicate. I mean, from medicate to educate, right? So I needed to help individuals change their lives and their lifestyles. And so then I transitioned at that point back to the United States and started learning and working at a lifestyle center where you have people coming in for 2.5 weeks, and to help them to learn how to live, how to reverse their diseases, and using natural remedies and lifestyle changes and simple things, going and walking after a meal, eating plants rather than animals, using water treatments, hydrotherapy, and other stuff like that, and seeing tremendous changes in the lives of individuals. Now, I was skeptical at the beginning. I really was, because doctors were educated to be skeptical about anything other than what we were educated in. And I was used to the hospital setting, and I was used to medication and fast responses, and now we're at a lifestyle center, and I saw some of the patients, and I was like, oh, I'm not sure we should be treating those here. With it as advanced as their disease process was. And Dr. Agatha Thrash, who was my mentor, she was like, Dr. Mark, just wait and watch. You'll see. And so I waited. And it was hard for me and my impatience to wait. But I waited and I watched, and I saw that individuals started getting better for the most part. Not everybody, but for the most part, they started getting better, and their conditions started improving, and it was just simple things, what you're eating and how you're exercising and getting your fresh air and sunshine, and these various different things. And I was like, wow, this is really great. And so I was really, gung-ho for that. And then this German physician came to Uchee Pines, and some of you know this German physician, and he presented this 20-part series over 25 hours on this idea of how the mind affects the body and principles associated with this and so on. And I sat in the audience, and my head was just spinning. It was just spinning, and I realized, oh, I need to take notes. And so I had, a notebook and a pen, and I was writing notes, and he would say things, and I'd be like, oh, that just seems so. And it was challenging. It was very challenging. And by the time that he was done with the whole 20-part series, my whole world was just somewhere else. I mean, I was just swimming in information that was completely the opposite of what I had, seemingly completely opposite of what I had heard and learned and so on before. And boy, we had audio recordings, and so I went back to the audio recordings, and I listened again. And I listened again, took more notes, and eventually I was like, oh, my patients need to, hear this. And so I put together one presentation, and they were engaged, and they were interested. And then they had questions. Like, oh man, they have questions. Then that means I have to have answers. And what if you don't have answers to the questions? But then and then you add a little bit more to the presentation to answer those particular questions, and then the presentation gets longer, and then one presentation turns into two, and then turns into more, and so on. And last week I was in Christchurch, and we were recording 24 hours of presentations. And hopefully at some point it'll be on First Light. I think probably editing will be done early next year. And then it might be on First Light here. But, you learn and you grow over time. And then I had the opportunity of not only speaking to patients in a group, but then interacting one-on-one with individuals and trying to find out what's going on in their lives and how what's going on in their lives relates to what's going on then in them physically. And the more that you deal with people one-on-one, the more you start to be able to see correlations that happen. If you jump off of a stair, one step, there's a correlation, right? There's a consequence that happens. And if you jump off of 2 steps, there's a correlation, right? There's a consequence or an effect that comes. And the higher you jump, well, the correlation remains. It's just that you land harder, and the higher you jump, you land harder, and you start learning the correlation between cause and effect. And as I have patients and see more of them and ask questions and ask about their lives and then how that relates to their particular physical outcomes, you begin to see more and more correlations. Well, the one patient that really kind of set things off for me, I call her Michelle, that's not her name, but But she came with a stage 3C ovarian cancer. And so she's just, on the verge of stage 4 metastatic. And with ovarian cancer, as long as it remains in the abdominal cavity, but it doesn't get into the bowel or into the liver or so on, then it's still stage 3. Once it then invades any of the other organs, gets into the uterus, gets into the liver and other organs, then it would be considered stage 4. So when she came to us, she had 11 tumors in her abdominal cavity, including the original tumor in the ovary. She had been through 2 rounds of chemotherapy, and each round of chemotherapy, the tumors were bigger and more in number. And, and so then I got to her after the 2 rounds of chemotherapy. The suggestion was from the medical team that she was working with that there was a clinical trial for a combination of certain chemotherapeutic agents that they're testing to see if it has any validity whatsoever in ovarian cancer, and they wanted to sign her up as one of the participants in this clinical trial. And she was not excited about that. She was an athlete and she was a coach and she was a very active individual, but after those 2 rounds of chemotherapy, she found it hard to get out of a chair, hard to walk. She was really, it was hard on her. And she wasn't interested in doing that. And so somehow she found our lifestyle center online and decided that she was going to come and try something else. And as a physician, in my career prior to going to the lifestyle center, I would have been like, you're crazy. Why would you go there? I mean, you had 2 rounds of chemotherapy. That's some of the strongest treatments that you can have for your cancer. You're going to go to where? To a lifestyle center? To what? Die? That's what I would have thought before, And but now that I had been at the lifestyle center and I had seen things happen and I had seen the power of, the change of lifestyle and other things like that had impact on individuals' lives, I was a bit more confident in regards to having a patient of that nature. But Horst Mueller had already come, and I had already understood that, all right, there are some significant interactions directly from the mind to the body in relation to the production of disease and then the remission of disease, or it going away, when you take care of the cause that's there in the mind. And so I, in talking with Michelle, of course we did the usual stuff. She was on a whole food plant-based diet, and we were doing hydrotherapy with her, and there were certain herbs that are known to be, helpful or beneficial with cancer, and so on. But it's also important to understand what's going on in the life of the individual before it happened. Right? So I was asking her about her life, and come to find out that she never knew who her father was, ever. She'd never met him. She had a name, and but she had never met him. And her mother, which was where the real problem was, her mother was kind of a party girl. And, the mother was into certain things like drugs and alcohol and men and so on. And Michelle was kind of a drag on mother's lifestyle. And so when Michelle was 8, her mother decided that it was best for her not to be with her anymore. And so mother left her off with the grandparents, for the grandparents to raise her. And that was a good thing. It was a good thing for Michelle and her situation, because grandparents were stable. Right? And they provided a stable environment for her growing up. But every once in a while, mother would come back into the picture, and mother was now jealous of the relationship that Michelle was developing with the grandparents, whom she now called mom and dad. And she would call the mother by her first name. And that did not go over well, and there was conflict and every time that mother came back into the picture. And so, well, obviously, or understandably, Michelle had issues of bitterness and resentment towards her mother. And I knew that the bitterness and resentment was not going to help her. I didn't know it was necessarily the cause of her condition, but I knew it wasn't going to help her. And so we talked about how she could be free from that bitterness and that resentment, and what she needed to do about it, and how she needed to relate to her sources, and that her having her mother as her source was not a good idea because her mother couldn't provide what she needed. That there is a source that can provide what you need, and that is God. And you need God. You don't need what your mother can give you. But you were created by God to function in a certain way. You were created to take everything that you need from Him and then serve as a channel passing it along to others. And as long as you are free taking from Him and you are free giving to others, well, things are going to function well. But the moment that gets cut off, the moment that gets broken, the moment you cannot love somebody else, the moment you cannot respect somebody else, the moment that you cannot honor somebody else, the moment that you cannot, well, problems are going to come. And oftentimes that ends up, over time, manifesting itself in disease. And so I was admonishing her to spend time every morning coming to God, taking from His love and asking for Him for love for her mother so that she can love her mother with God's love. And so she, she did the diet and she did the exercise and she did the other things, but she also did the God time in the mornings. And, when you're changing so many things in the life of the individual, you never know exactly what's the big factor that results in the change or the transformation. Oh, is it the diet? Is it the exercise? Is it the hydrotherapy? Is it the herbs? Is it the, what do you attribute it to? And so it can be difficult to discern through those things. And the reason why her case is quite interesting is because, well, by the time the session was over in 2.5 weeks, her cancer markers were down in the normal range. And she had a lot more energy. She could go for a walk and then jog for a little bit and then walk a little bit more and then jog for a little bit and walk a little bit more. And she was excited. She was praising God and hallelujah at the end of that session. And she went home, and 2 months later she had a repeat scan. And the scan showed that 5 tumors remained. 6 of them are gone. And the 5 tumors that remained were smaller than what they were before. And so her condition clearly is turning around, right? And so the cancer is going away. And so clearly something had been addressed that was not being addressed by the chemotherapy and other treatments previously. And so then, and still, well, what are the factors? What's actually going into it that's making the difference? Well, two months later after that, so we're 4 months out from her time with us, we get a call, and she's crying, and her cancer markers are back up. Okay, well, what's going on? No, she's still on the diet, she's still exercising, she is still, she's still doing the hydrotherapy at home, she's still on the herbs and all that kind of stuff, but guess what? Mom came back into the picture. Yeah. Mom came back in the picture. And Mom created, Mom is chaotic. That's just the life of Mom. And Mom's chaos came into Michelle's presence, and she forgot pretty much everything that we talked about. And so now she's back in the resentment and the bitterness and so on. So now all these things that we had initiated from a lifestyle and natural remedy standpoint, they're still happening, but her cancer's coming back because the cancer markers are going back up. And the thing that changed was, it was in relation to Mother, but the thing that changed was her thinking, right? Her own thinking in relation to her mother, right? And so I talked with her, had another, I reminded her about what we talked about before. You need God, you don't need your mother. She needs to be free to be however she is, and you need to be able to have a love that can let her be free so that she can be however she wants to be. And that's fine. And you can take God's love and you can love her with God's love however she behaves and whatever she's like. And you don't have to be a slave to her. You don't need her to be a certain way in order for you to be okay. Now I'll tell you this, if you need somebody to be okay in order for you to be okay, that's not okay. Unless it's God. But if it's another person that you need to be okay in order for you to be okay, that's not okay. It indicates that there's a problem. And that was the case with Michelle. And so I counseled with her, and again, she's taking of God's love, she's giving it to her mother, and, thinking in the right lines and so on. And next call, cancer markers, back down in the normal range. So you could see very clear a correlation, right? A correlation between how her thinking is going and how her health outcomes are. Now, it's a nice case because you get to see, you get to see that. Oftentimes, I either don't get feedback from individuals, or I meet with them once or whatever, and sometimes I don't meet with them again. Although sometimes it's nice. I went to a camp meeting in Michigan. No, it was Wisconsin. That's where it went. I was speaking at a camp meeting in Wisconsin, and I ran into 5 people that I had seen previously. One of them was only 2 phone consultations. A couple of them had come to Uchee Pines and whatever. And one of them had a particular type of abdominal cancer that the oncologists don't have a solution for. They just don't. So we had a couple of phones. She came up to me and she's like, "Hey, do you recognize me?" And I'm like, and she's like, "Well, we've never seen each other before." I'm like, "Oh, okay." Well, but we did have 2 phone consultations. So we met over the phone. And it was, I think, 5 years later or something like that. And she had no traces of the cancer anymore. And her oncologist was like, "We don't have any solutions for you, but whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Right? Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." And there were some other people that I got to run into. So it's neat to be able to have those experiences of running into people later. But Michelle's case was a very interesting case. Now, what doctors don't know about disease? It's a lot. Yeah, do you know the big thing that doctors don't know about disease?
That it's curable.
The cause. The cause. Right? That's the big thing that doctors don't know about disease. They don't know the cause. Now, doctors know pathophysiology associated with disease. Absolutely. I mean, that's what we're taught. We're taught biochemical pathways. We're taught, the physiology of the body and how it operates, and, how does the liver function, what enzymes are used in it in the process of detoxifying, how do the kidneys function, what are the cellular units involved in it, how does it go about its processes, and all that kind of stuff. But science has a certain predisposition, and the predisposition is that science believes that everything is physical and only physical. And so if everything is physical and is only physical, then all you have to do is to figure out the physical aspects, and now you trace it back to whatever origin you can find physically. And if you get back to that physical origin, now if you fix that point, then you should be able to fix all of the rest of it. And it's logical. That is absolutely logical. Right? And that's a conclusion that if you believe that everything is physical, then that's a correct conclusion to come to. Right? It is. And because you want to get to the first domino, because one domino, if knocks over the other domino, knocks over the other one, and so on. And if you get to the 5th domino in the line, well, okay, yeah, you can deal with whatever comes before the other dominoes after that. So you help domino number 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 and so on. But what about domino number 5? And what about number 4 and 3 and 2? And really, I want to know number 1. And not only 1, I want to know what happened to number 1, right? And where does that go, right? How far back does that go? And so if all you know is physiology and pathophysiology, well, you're going to go back to as far as you can to the first physical domino, but the question is there something before that? Is there something before that? And if there is something before that, do we want to know what it is? And I would say, yes, I want to know what it is. And for most of my medical career, I didn't know what it was. And that ultimately is the cause. If you have, let's say for instance, you have diabetes, and you go to your doctor and you actually ask your doctor, what's the cause of my diabetes? What's your doctor going to say? Well, because you don't have ideal weight, right? So you're overweight or you're obese or whatever, because you're not exercising very well, because you're eating a high-fat diet, because you have processed foods in your diet and other things like that, right? All of these are risk factors for you to have this condition. Right? Those are risk factors to have the condition. And okay, yes, so medicine speaks of things in terms of risk factors. But you can ask your doctor, okay, so does every person who has these risk factors have diabetes? Well, of course, the answer is no. No, it's not the case, right? So, if not everybody who has those risk factors has the condition, then is it the cause? Or is it simply an association? Some kind of association that's there? Well, yes, there can be associations, and yes, we can do studies, and we can discover associations that are there between this, that, and the other thing. But if you find the cause, it will be the cause what percentage of the time? 100% of the time. Right? If it's truly the cause, then it'll be the cause. It'll be the cause, right? And so, what we don't know is that. Right? We don't know that. What's the cause? And if you press your doctor on it, they're eventually going to get angry, walk out on you, or admit, I don't know what the cause is. And okay, but I'm not saying press them. You don't need to create problems. We don't need to be problematic. Sometimes it's much easier just to go and smile, say yes, cooperate, get whatever needs to be gotten, and then go make your own choices and your own decisions based upon whatever. Just recognize that whatever the doctor says is a recommendation, and take it as that, as a recommendation. Oftentimes people go to the doctor and they think whatever the doctor says is law. But no, it's a recommendation. And then you think about it, and you pray about it, you bring it to God, and you say, okay, Lord, what would you have me to do? And if it seems to go in the direction of what the doctor says, go with it. Fine. Right? So let's say here you have a tree, of course, and let's say that the tree has some bad fruit and bad leaves on it. The most obvious part of a tree is, of course, the above ground part. We will obviously, or the things that we will most likely notice will be, the size of the tree, the shape of the tree, the color of the leaves, the type of the leaves. And if it's fruit season, which it isn't quite yet, then we'll notice the fruit. And so the very obvious things in the health context are symptoms. If you have pain, you know you have pain. If you're coughing, you know you're coughing. If you've got an itch, you know you got an itch. It's obvious, right? Symptoms are obvious. And how do we usually take care of symptoms? Yeah, so we'll usually medicate it. So there's usually a pill for every ill that's out there, or multiple options for every ill. And so yeah, we'll take if you got pain, you'll take a pain medication or an analgesic, or whatever different form. If you have a cough, then you're going to take something that is a cough suppressant. And if you're itching, then you might be taking, well, I don't know what name brands you have around here, but diphenhydramine or other medications that help with the itching and so on. Now, let's just say that you have pain in your back, and it's very serious pain. It came on suddenly, and it's kind of a sharp stabbing type of pain. And you can't lay down on your back, and it's just really painful. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, you finally had enough, and you go to the emergency department, but they have had, there was some kind of major accident, multi-car pileup, and they're just swamped with traumas that are there. And so they have somebody just triaging in the emergency department, and you got back pain, okay, here's a prescription, go get it filled, see your doctor in the morning. And so you do, you go get it filled, and you've taken some over-the-counter medication, that really didn't do much. Now you have this prescription medication, it's doing a little bit better. You still can't lay on your back. You might be able to get an hour, hour and a half of sleep at night before the morning hits, and it's just still painful. And you finally go to your doctor, and your doctor thinks, well, let's do an exam. Well, there's a reason why you have pain in your back. Okay. And there's a reason why it's sharp and stabbing. Might have something in relation to what you said to somebody else. But anyway, so did the medication take away the cause? No, it only deals with the effect, right? The effect of it is the symptom. And that's not to say don't take medication or anything else like that for symptoms. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that it doesn't usually address the cause, right? It doesn't address the cause because the cause lies deeper than that. Now, if you have symptoms, it's like the fire alarm. Is it good to have a fire alarm if you need one? Yes, it's good to have one if you need one. But if the fire alarm is going off, is that good? No, it indicates that there is something that is not good. But the fact that it can go off and alert you to the fact that something is not good, that's good. So the fire alarm is on the good side of things. The fire is on the bad side of things, right? And so when we have symptoms, symptoms are like the fire alarm. It's not the fire. It's just letting you know the fire is there. So if our response to the fire being there and the fire alarm waking us up and we can't go to sleep, if our response is to put a pillow on that, and so instead of going, it's now going, and maybe you can get back to sleep, but you're standing on the wall and you can't do that, so let's get some duct tape and let's just tape it down so you can go back to bed. Well, if you get burned up, whose fault is it? Yeah, it's yours. Because the fire alarm was there in order to help you, to let you know there was a problem so that you could do something about the problem. But if you simply silence the alarm, and now you don't do anything about the problem, the cause, that's a problem. And there'll be consequences associated with it. There will be. Now, the fruit and the leaves don't grow by themselves. The fruit and the leaves grow on the branches, and the branches represent our behaviors. So I began in a system that primarily focuses on symptoms. Right? That's the primary, there's other stuff that the healthcare system does. And mind you, the healthcare system does some things quite well. It does acute care quite well. It does intensive care quite well. It does diagnostics quite well. Right? There are a number of things that it does quite well. And when I was at the Lifestyle Center, I would tell people, if I'm in a car accident, do not take me to the Lifestyle Center. Right? Take me to the hospital, because they do trauma well. Right? They do trauma well. And but there are some things that our healthcare system does not do well, and that is long-term management of chronic non-communicable diseases. We don't do diabetes well. We don't do hypertension well. We don't do high cholesterol well. We don't do a lot of these things well, right? And I would argue that we don't do cancer well, but that might be stepping on too many toes. So I'm not saying don't use the system, and I'm not against the system. I mean, I have worked for years in the system, and I love people there. But there's certain things that it just doesn't do well. Right? Now, so I went from symptoms to behavior. I went to a lifestyle center. And so now we're going to focus on your breathing, and we're going to focus on your drinking, and we're going to focus on your eating, and so on. Because these are important, are they not? Yeah, they're important. And why do we have the behaviors that we do? Well, we're going to get to that. But those are important, and it's getting a little bit deeper. But the branches don't grow by themselves. What do they grow on? Or grow from? No, it grows from the trunk, right? And the trunk represents your needs. If you have a problem in the tree, well, sure, you can pluck off the fruit and the leaves. That might help. Doesn't fix the problem, but it might help. You can prune the branches, and that might help. But what do you do with the trunk? I mean, if you have maple trees, you can tap it and, and get something from it, and then eventually make maple syrup and whatever. But there's not much you do with the trunk. Some places where I've been, well, they paint the trunks white. That's something you can do with the trunk. And if it's really a problem, you just cut the trunk. Right? But there's not much you do with the trunk. And what can you do with your needs? I mean, can you change the fact that you need oxygen and water and food and so on? No. You need what you need because you are what you are, and you can't change what you are, so you can't change what you need. And you can't just decide that you don't need it when you need it. You might say, okay, well, I don't need oxygen anymore. Good luck. That's not going to last very long, right? And you'll have some pretty good motivation to let you know, no, that was a bad decision, right? But everything that you need comes from outside of you, and if it stays outside of you, you die. If the oxygen stays at your nose and it doesn't get in, you're going to die. You can only live when you bring it in and it becomes a part of you. And the water that you need, if it stays at your lips, you're going to die. The only way you're going to live is if it comes inside of you and it becomes a part of who you are. So everything that you need comes from outside of you, and it must be brought inside of you in order for you to live. Now, who's responsible for bringing it in? Yeah, you are. Right? So you need oxygen. It's not going to blow into you. You have to breathe. And you need water, and it's not going to squirt into you. You have to drink. And you need food, and it's not going to crawl down your throat. We hope so. You've got to eat it. Right? So it's your own responsibility to take what you need and bring it in. And so everything first takes in what it needs, but what does it do with it? Does it keep it? How big would you be if you kept every bite of food you ever ate? Well, we probably wouldn't make it through the back door. Right? No, you keep very little of what you have eaten. I think it's estimated that an individual will eat the equivalent of about 6 full-grown elephants in their lifetime. So you get an idea of what you might be like at 80. Right? Yeah, no, you take a lot, but you give as well. And what you give is a benefit to something or someone else. Right? That's a benefit. So, what you need because what you are. You can't change that, so the needs don't change. Right? But you breathe because you need oxygen, you drink because you need water, you eat because you need food. The behaviors are there to supply what you need. But the trunk doesn't grow from itself, the trunk grows from the roots. That's right, it grows from the roots. And the roots now you have to start digging. It's not obvious, you gotta start digging and look for it and try to find it. And the roots represent our beliefs. It's not directly obvious what an individual believes. You've got to interact with them, you've got to talk with them, you've got to understand what's going on, you've got to have a conversation and exchange information. And then you can begin to understand what an individual believes. Or you simply have to have enough time with them. Right? Have enough time with them. Because there's another way other than conversations that you can understand what an individual believes. And that is by how an individual behaves. Because behavior is driven by belief. If you believe that you need, what's the most common soft drink here, or pop or soda or Coca-Cola. All right, so let's say that you believe that you need Coca-Cola. How are you going to behave in relation to Coca-Cola? Yeah, you're going to drink it, right? You're going to drink it. And if you need it, well, yeah, you better drink it every day. And I've had patients that would drink 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 2-liter bottles of Coca-Cola or another soft drink a day. Do you need Coca-Cola? No, you don't. You don't. But if you believe you need it, you're going to drink it. And if you drink what you don't believe, if you drink what you don't need, right? If you drink what you don't need, well, then that's not going to supply your need, and you're going to end up with some bad fruit and bad leaves at some point, right? That's what's going to happen. It's just going to be. So is it important what you believe? Well, sure. And your beliefs should match with your needs, because then your behaviors are going to supply what you need. But if you have a tree that has bad fruit and bad leaves, what do you fix? All right, so the roots. Now, how often do you deal with the roots? Like, have you ever dug up the roots and, kind of did stuff with the roots? No, what do you do? Okay, fertilizer. All right, that's good. So where are you putting the fertilizer? In the soil. Oh, so if you have a problem with the tree, you don't have a problem with the tree, you have a problem with the soil. And then you have to fix the soil, and when you fix the soil, you fix the tree. So the soil represents our sources. So that's important. It's vastly important. If your source has what you need, that's great. Things are going to work. But if your source has too little of what you need, if it has too much of what you need, if it has the wrong stuff, it's going to be a problem. So we need the right source. We need beliefs that align with our needs, because that never changes. And then where our behaviors can supply what we need, and then we can end up with good fruit and good leaves. But if we have the wrong source, I don't care what you believe and how you behave, you're going to end up with bad fruit and bad leaves. And Michelle had the wrong source. Who was her source? Her mother. And her mother had too little, of what she really needed, too much of what she didn't need, and she had a whole bunch of wrong stuff. And when she had her mother as her source, she couldn't help but have bad fruit and bad leaves. Couldn't help it. It wasn't on purpose. She couldn't help it. Right? But the problem was she had the wrong source. Now, how many of us need love? Anybody here not need love? All right, good. We're still on the right track. Right? Still in the human population. All right, so yes, as humans, we need love. You need what you need because you are what you are, and you're a human being, and a human being needs love. And for everything that you need, there must be a behavior to bring in what you need, and everything that you need must come from outside of you, and if it stays outside of you, you die. So it must be brought inside of you in order for you to live. So you need oxygen, therefore you breathe. You need water, therefore you drink. You need food, therefore you eat. You need love, therefore you what? Okay, all right. So you need oxygen, so you oxygen. You need water, so you water. You need food, so you food. All right, let me put it this way. So you need oxygen, so you give out oxygen. Is that how it works? You need water, so you give out water. Is that how it works? No. You need food, so you give out food. Is that how it works? No. If you need it, you must bring it in. So why, when it comes to love, do we have the idea that if we need it, we must give it out? Now, I'll tell you, all of us grow up believing this. So it's the natural response. I hear it everywhere. I don't care what language, I don't care what continent, I don't care where I'm speaking. That's the response I get. We all believe it. But why? And is it right or is it not? Well, let's say that you're having a bad day and you came home and you stop at the mail And, and you pick up the mail, and at least one of them was not a bill. And it happened to be handwritten, and it was written, the return address was, you knew the individual, and this was a good person to get a letter from. And you open up the letter, and it says, "Dear," and it has your name associated with it, and it says, "I'm thinking about the last time that we were together and can't get you off my mind, and looking forward to when we can be together again in the future," and, and so on and so on, and it's all nice and lovey mushy stuff, and then it gets to the end, and it says love, and they put their name on there, heart, XOXO, and whatever. How do you feel after you receive the letter? Oh yeah, you're feeling good, you feel loved, right? So how is it that you went from bad day to feeling loved with a letter? Did the paper have love in it? No. Did the ink have love in it? No, it didn't. Where did the love come from? How did you get love out of that? All right. So what was on the paper? Words. It was ink. And ink was in there in a particular pattern. And you have been taught that if you see this symbol, it means this letter. And these symbols together are these letters, which means this word. And this word has this meaning. And if you put these words together, it has this meaning, and so on. And so what you have done is you have taken the information that is contained in the letter, and you have extracted it. You have interpreted it, and you now understand that it means love. So you've taken information, you have interpreted it, you've understood it to mean love, and now you realize it's from that individual to you. And you believe it. You believe it. Now it becomes yours. You have now taken the love and you have brought it in. So we need oxygen, so we breathe. We need water, so we drink. We need food, so we eat. We need love, so we think. It's a process of thinking. It's a process of interpreting information or being exposed to information that we interpret to mean love and then believing it. Then it becomes ours. Right? And it comes in. So it's part of a thought process. So you cannot take in love without thinking. Now, what if you believe that people can be the source of the love that you need? How's that going to turn out? Well, if you take a tree and you take the roots of that tree out of the soil and you put the roots into another tree, and you take that second tree and you pull its roots out of the soil and you put it in a third tree, and you take the third tree's roots and you pull it out of the soil and you put it in a fourth tree, and you just continue doing that until every tree has its roots in every other tree. What's going to happen? They're all going to die. They're all going to die. Because no tree can be a source for another tree. Because every tree needs the same things. And so if one tree goes to the other tree to get what it needs, it's going to take from that other tree what that tree needs, which might try to take it from another one, which might try to take it from another one, but eventually you're going to use up all the resources, and all of the trees are going to die. And it probably won't take too long. So it illustrates that something that needs something cannot be the source of what it needs. Right? Anything that needs something cannot be a source of what it needs. So what happens if you put a person's roots in another person? And you take that second person and you put their roots in a third person. And you take the third person and they put their roots in a fourth person. And you can even interroot. So the first person has their roots in the second person, but the second person has their roots in the first person and the third person and the seventh person and so on. And you just put all of the roots of people and all of the roots of other people, what's going to happen to all the people? They're all going to die. Right? Because no person can be a source for what another person needs. Can't be. Right? It's cannibalism, and cannibalism will eventually end in annihilation. It eventually will. If everybody cannibalizes somebody else, it's eventually going to annihilate the whole population. It won't work. So what if I think that I need love from you, but you need love from me? And I need love from multiple people, and you need love from multiple people, and everybody's getting their love from everybody else. How's that going to work out in the end? Yeah, we're going to eat each other up.
Civil war.
Yeah, civil war. Well, that's right. That's right. Why do we have the problems that we do? Because we're crazy. We're crazy. We are. So now everything that functions is governed by law. It helps to understand that. And all laws that govern function are unchangeable. And proper function is only maintained by remaining within the law, and dysfunction is the result of going outside of the law. And when we think of law and consider law, we need to consider that there is a fundamental law of all nature. And that fundamental law of all nature is very simple. It just has 2 points. And that is that nothing in nature exists or functions from itself, and nothing in nature exists or functions for itself. So that means that everything has needs. It needs power, it needs material, it needs resources, whatever that might be, in order for it to exist, in order for it to function, and if it's a living thing, in order for it to live. And it also means that all things take that and use it somehow. Right? You don't just take it and become the end. You take it and you use it and you do something and you pass something along, and other things will benefit from that, whatever you give. Right? Now, remember, you take food, but guess what? You give food. Right? Do you eat the food you give? No, please. No. You only eat the food you take. But you took food from something else that what your food was what they got rid of, right? So an apple tree eats soil, it eats dirt, right? That's where it gets its nutrients from, right? So it eats dirt, it eats sunlight, it eats water, and it gives you apples. And apples are like what it would flush down the toilet, right? But you eat the apples, and you get the apples, but then you give something, and something else lives from what you give, and then it gives something, and then something else lives from that, and so on. And everything is taking and everything is giving, and that is the law. The fundamental law is that everything, I don't care how big it is, I don't care how small it is, I don't care how complex the component might be, everything takes in order to give. Everything takes from one place and it gives in another. And so from this, we get things like thermodynamics that tell us that all energy necessary for a system to function must come from outside of that system. So if you have anything, it must have had power, it must have had material or resources outside of itself in order for it to be there, to happen. Right? So, for example, cancer, we were talking about Michelle with her cancer, the tumor did not create itself. There had to be material, there had to be resources, there had to be power as well that was made available for that tumor to then be able to develop and then to grow. It had to be there. And the cause always comes from outside of where the effect is. Always. Because the power, material, resource had to come from somewhere else in order to be, and then be brought there in order for it to manifest there. Right? And then, of course, there's cause and effect that comes from this fundamental law that every effect must have a cause and every cause produces an effect. Right? And everything else is built upon this as well. These are just a couple of examples. The laws of motion, right? They're built off of this fundamental law as well. And we call this law the law of life, right? And it is taking a give, and everything in nature functions according to that law of life. Right. Now, let me skip a bunch of slides for time's sake. Woohoo! And we will consider that laws govern function and define the borders of function. So if I'm within the law, then there's health and proper function, and it's comfortable, and there's certain things that I need to be, within the law. And it's true within love as well. And once I get outside of the law, now it gets uncomfortable. Not only does it get uncomfortable, but it doesn't work very well. And eventually, if it goes far enough, it's really not going to work. Right. So health is proper function, which is the effect of staying within the law. And disease is dysfunction, which is the effect of going outside of the law. And symptoms and disease, well, they're like the fire alarm and the rumble strips. They show you that if you're on the rumble strips and if the fire alarm is going off, that means there's a problem. But the fact that the fire alarm and the rumble strips are there is to protect you. So disease is for your protection. Symptoms are for your protection. It's there to let you know something's wrong. And the problem is not the disease, and the problem is not the symptoms. That's just there to let you know, look for the cause. Go look for the cause. Right. And when we're thinking of cause, there's a law of cause and effect. Every effect must have a cause. Every cause produces an effect. And if the effect is present, that means that the cause is present as well. Right? If the effect is there, the cause has to be there. And if the cause is removed, then the effect must cease. Now, let me throw in a caveat in relation to that, and that is that you can have, like from a physical standpoint, you can have a cause that's in place that is resulting in damage, and the damage can replace normal tissue with scar tissue, and you can get to the point where the damage becomes, from a natural standpoint, irreversible. But if you remove the cause, the process of continued damage should stop. And what you have remaining as far as function should remain. Maybe improve a little bit, but you might not get back all the way to what you were before. Right? In fact, oftentimes you don't. But at least the process of continuing down that pathway should end when the cause is removed. And like in the case with Michelle, with her cancer, when the cause was removed, now you start seeing the cancer going away. But since it took a while for the cancer to come, oftentimes it takes a while for it to go away once the cause is removed. Right? And yes, you can come to the point where you have gone so far, you can remove the cause and you're not getting back. You can be in critical condition, you can be in other things of that nature. Yes, the cause might be removed. You might still be alive right now, but it's not a guarantee that you're getting back. Right. So there are those factors associated with it as well. Now, no effect can produce itself because it's dependent upon power and materials outside of itself to function. So therefore, you will never find an effect without a cause. Never. Now, this is another place where I differ from my earlier training, my medical school training and the health system, the healthcare system, because the healthcare system is oftentimes built upon the idea of chance. And really, there is no such thing as chance. There's not. And there's nothing that is truly random. Random is simply our inability to predict what the next step is going to be or what the outcome will be. And that's just our limitation. Right? Can God predict what's coming next? Oh yeah, sure. There's nothing truly random. Right? We are told in Scripture that the curse causeless shall not come. Right? It shall not come. There's always a cause. And we're also told that in the laws of God and nature, effect follows cause with unerring certainty. And the will of God establishes the connection between cause and its effects. Now, when we think about breaking law, what do we call the breaking of law? Okay, so it depends on which law that we're talking about. If you go and you steal something from your neighbor, then you have broken a civil law, and the breaking of a civil law is crime. We might have various different terms for it. Like in the U.S. system, it might be a misdemeanor or a felony or other things like that, but it's a crime. But if you break a God-given law, then we call that sin. And when we talk about sin, which law is broken? Oh yeah, God's law, the Ten Commandments. And what's the foundation of God's law? Yeah, it's love. It's the very thing you need. And so, we find that often, very often, disease is a result of a love problem. It's a result of a love problem. Because sin is a love problem. It's a love problem. So there is a divinely appointed connection between sin and disease. No physician can practice for a month without seeing this illustrated. If he will be observing and honest, he cannot help acknowledging that sin and disease bear to each other the relationship of cause and effect. Well, yes, very clear, very clear. And this is not to, and we'll find throughout this week that this is not to blame anybody at all. How many of you were born? Yeah, okay, good, all right, yeah. Just checking. Yeah. The Filipino connection is not sure about that yet. Right? How many of you were born with certain propensities? Yeah. Did you ask for those before you were born with them? No, of course not. Of course not. You were born with certain propensities that you didn't ask for, but you got them anyways, right? That's just how it was. Are you guilty for the propensities that you were born with? No. No, of course not. No. Not at all. So there's no guilt for the way that we were born. There's no guilt for the propensities that we were born with. No, not at all. And so it's not about guilt and it's not about blame, but we do need to understand what the cause is, right? And where the cause comes from. Now, let's look at it from a cellular standpoint. So here you have a cell. We have, as an adult, you have 50 to 100 trillion cells in your body and over 250 different types of cells. And cells kind of function like little factories, and factories produce products. And of course, the cells produce like cell adhesion molecules, cell signaling molecules, autocrines, paracrines, hormones, all sorts of stuff, all sorts of things that it produces. And the function of your body as a whole is dependent upon the function of the individual different cells that you have. And if you lose a certain cell population, a certain type of cell, then you lose all of the functions that are specific to that type of cell. Right? And one example that we can easily think of is diabetes or type 1 diabetes. Right? Type 1 diabetes, typically you have a young one, and it's an autoimmune condition, and now the immune system is killing off what type of cell? Medical people? It's a beta islet cell. Right? It's a beta islet cell in what organ? Pancreas, right? So the beta islet cells are found in the pancreas, and the beta islet cells produce something. Insulin. They're the only cells in the body that produce insulin. And so what happens if you kill off all of the beta islet cells? No more insulin. No more insulin. And you need insulin in order to get sugar, glucose, from the outside of the cell to the inside of the cell at a rate that the cells need it in order to be able to function. So if you don't have insulin, the sugar accumulates outside of the cells and it depletes inside of the cells, and eventually you will die because the cells run out of fuel, even though lots of fuel is sticking around it. Right? You don't die because of high blood sugar, you die because you run out of fuel inside the cells. Well, we do know that a cause will immediately begin to produce an effect, but it might take time for the effect to get large enough in order for you to notice it. So let's, in this case of type 1 diabetes and so on, let's just imagine that you have 20 billion beta islet cells. I don't know how many you have, but we're just going to assume 20 billion. If you have 20 billion beta islet cells, it's generally understood that you have to lose about half of a cell population before you notice the effects of the loss of that cell population. So how many beta islet cells will you have to lose before you start noticing the effect? About 10 billion, right? So let's say that right now a process begins and it starts killing off 100 beta islet cells every second. So 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, and it keeps cutting off and killing off beta islet cells at that rate. Now this is not how it works, but we're just doing a thought experiment. Right? So you would lose 100 cells in a second, 6,000 in a minute, 360,000 in an hour, 8.6 million in a day, 60.5 million in a week, 260 million in a month, and 3.2 billion in a year. It would take you at that rate 3 years and 2 months of the cause being in place and the effect being produced before it gets big enough that you notice it, right? So you can have certain disease processes that are faster, other ones that are slower. Some of them, it might be seconds, minutes, or hours between the cause being in place and the effect being noticed. And other ones, it can be years or decades between the cause in place and the effect now being noticed. Rarely does somebody notice that they have cancer when it's small. I did have one friend / patient, and she felt like she was weak. She felt like things were not going well. She just felt, she just had these symptoms, and she knew something was wrong, and she was looking for it, and finally they discovered she had like a pea-sized tumor in her breast. And they removed the pea-sized tumor, and she felt better. Now, there's got to be other things that are going on because there's a cause. And removing the tumor doesn't remove the cause. Right? But, most people, it's more extensive before they recognize. But if you want to know what the cause is, it must meet this criteria. The cause must be in place before you first notice the effect. So if you have a disease or some kind of condition, the cause had to be in place before you had the first symptom associated with that condition. Right? Make sense? Yeah. And if the condition is still there and it's an active process, right? And diseases typically are active processes. If it's a continuing active process, then the effect must still be there now, as it's still progressing, right? So what you're looking for in the life of the individual is something that was there before they had their first symptom, and that is still there in the life of the person now. So that's what I'm looking for. So when I talk to people, I want to know, when did you have the first symptom? Because that gives me the timeline, right? The time frame. Anything that comes after that cannot be the cause. The cause must be before that. So if I'm interested in the cause, I don't need to know your history after that point. I need to know your history before that point, because that's where I'm looking for the cause. But it's not necessarily 3 seconds before the thing was manifested. Again, some processes can be slow. It could be decades before that, but it needs to be before that. And it has to be something that's still in your life now. Right? Still in your life now. And so those are the things that we're looking for. And I'm interested in the cause because if the cause can be removed, then the effect is going to go away. And sometimes that can be interpreted as a cure. A cure, right? Take away the cause and the effect goes away. We call that a cure. So yes, things can be cured. So every cell functions by the law, and the law is that everything must take in order to give, and every living system everything that lives, at least on this planet, requires two components. It requires fuel, and it requires a spark or something to get the fuel ignited and going. Right? So there has to be something that gets the process up and going, and then there has to be something that continues the process. And the fuel continues the process, but it doesn't begin it. There has to be something that begins the process. And so there's the resources and the power, and the cell itself must take that in. And does it take to keep to itself? No, it takes in order to give. So now it's going to produce something associated with that. And that what it produces is going to be of benefit to then other cells in the body and so on. And so the fuel for the cells includes your oxygen, your water, and your nutrients. It's chemicals. Right? Chemicals serve as the fuel for the cell. Glucose, you have sodium and potassium that are involved in a lot of different things, calcium and so on. All of these are intercellular components. You have various different hormones that are needed in the various different ones and so on. So yes, you have these chemicals. And every chemical that you need, there's a system of the body that chemical comes into the body through, like oxygen through the lungs. Now, how many cells need oxygen? All of them. So how are you going to get it from the lungs to the toes? Yeah, through the blood, right? The blood is the transport mechanism. It's the semi-truck that carries the payload of the fuel and gets it to the different parts of the body so that it can function. And we're told for the life of the flesh is in the blood. And so if you cut off the circulation or you have circulation problems, well, that's going to create problems with the fuel supply and therefore the function of the cells that are affected by the fuel problem, right? And the cells can extract what they need if there is a good concentration of the chemicals that they need, but if there's too little and there's too much, that can be a problem. That can be a problem, deficiencies and toxicities. But where does the spark come from? Where does the spark come from in order for the cell to function? Well, according to the laws of thermodynamics, the power necessary for a system to function must come from outside of that system. So the spark must come from outside of the cell. And by it, then the cell can begin its function. And then by the chemicals, the cell can continue its function. And the cells function as electrical and chemical units. There's electricity that's there. You can measure the voltage difference between the inside and outside of a cell, and in its normal state, it's usually around -70 to -90 millivolts. And then there is resistance to flow across the membrane, and then if you actually have charged particles going in and out of the cell, then that's called current. So you have current, you have resistance, you have voltage. That's all electrical. Right? Cells function as electrical units, but they need fuel, so they're chemical units as well, electrochemical. Where does the spark come from? And how many cells need to be controlled in their function? All of them. So where's the spark going to come from that's going to control the function? Right, ultimately, yes. But it's going to be through the brain, right? Through your central nervous system. And via the nerves to the various different cells of the body. Now, where does the brain get the spark from? I'm not talking about the fuel. The fuel comes from glucose and other things like that. Where does the brain get the spark from in order for it to be the controller of the rest of the system? It can't come from inside of itself. It must come from outside of itself. Right? And it comes from spiritual information. Right? Isn't the Word of God with power? Isn't it power? Right? Jesus said, the words that I speak to you, they are spirit and they are life. And of course, he was the truth, right? And so on, right? There is a power that comes with information. And in fact, the food of the mind is information. And information has power. It does, it has power. It is a power. And, or it has power. And so you and I are not just physical, we are also spiritual. And in order for us to take in spiritual information, just like you have a physical organ or organ system that brings in the physical things that you need, you must have a spiritual organ or organ system that brings in the spiritual things you need, and that we call the Spirit. And in the Bible, we read that in Genesis 2 and verse 7, the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, breathed in his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being or a living soul. So the dust, which is very simple, becomes a very complex body. And the breath, which is very simple, becomes a very complex spirit. And the combination of the two is the soul. It's you. Right? You don't have a soul, you are a soul. And the soul is made up of two components, and that is physical and spiritual, or body and spirit. It's kind of like a computer. A computer has two components, software and hardware. And if you only have hardware, you have no function. If you only have software, you've got nothing. You must have both in order for it to function. But when you bring the hardware and the software together, the hardware doesn't stop being hardware and the software doesn't stop being software. The hardware is still hardware and the software is still software. And the hardware has certain aspects of components of the overall function, and the software has overall components of the function, but there's no function unless they're together. And it's the same thing with the body and the spirit. The body has certain parts of the function, the spirit has other parts of the function, but there's no function unless they're together. And how did God create us? He created us in, how did God create us? He created us in His image. Right? And in creation, which came first? Was it the physical or the spiritual? I know it's a trick question. It really is. It's a trick question because I put a picture up here first, and then you say, okay, well, then He made the dust of the ground, and then He breathed in His nostrils a breath of life, and man became a living soul. But where did the dust come from? Oh, it came from God. And what did God do to make it? He spoke. Right? So God created, and we're told that God is spirit, and God said, and it was. And we're also told that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and without Him was nothing that was nothing made that was made, and through Him were all things that were made, right? And He says, the words that I speak to you, they are spirit or life. And He was the Word made flesh. And so the Word that was made flesh, He said, the words that I speak to you are spirit. So God, who is spirit, spoke what was spirit, and from spirit came everything physical. So it's the spiritual that's first, always. The spiritual, the physical is the effect. But science looks at it the other way. It says that physical is the cause and the spiritual is the effect. Right? You think because of your chemistry. Because of the chemistry, because of how the molecules are put together, because of the complexity of the nervous system and all that kind of stuff that comes together, now thought is the effect of the physical. But from a biblical standpoint, we say, no, it's the spiritual that is the beginning, right? The beginning is from a spiritual standpoint. And so it's not the chemical that creates the thought, it's the thought that affects the chemical. Right? And the physical space. So from the spiritual comes everything that's physical. We were created in His image, so in us, it's the spiritual that's first, which then impacts the physical. And so we take the spiritual information that's taken in by the Spirit and made available to the cortex of the brain. When that information, which has power, gets to the cortex of the brain, as you have probably learned in physics class and other things like that, when power comes from one medium to another medium, it changes its form. But it doesn't change the fact that it's power. It may go from potential energy to kinetic energy, or it might go from kinetic to potential. It might go from friction to heat, to the movement of molecules. It might go from a turbine, water power with under gravity, through a turbine to electricity and so on and so forth. It's still power. It's as much power as it was in the water in the lake as it is going electricity through the wire. Right? It just changes its form when it goes from one medium to another medium. And so when the spiritual power from information gets to the physical brain, it generates the electrical impulse that you can now measure with an EEG and other things like that. And now that electrical impulse through the nervous system is going to the various different parts of the body. And that then sends signals to the various different cells to control their function. And it's the soul, which includes the central nervous system and the spirit. You are a soul. It's the soul that thinks. Right? It's the soul that, or let's say the mind, right? It's the mind that thinks. It's not the brain itself that can think. The chemicals can't think. But you need the chemicals. You need the brain in order to do the thinking. So you got to have both, right? The spirit and the brain is the mind. And he said, let us make man in our own image, and God is the author of truth. He is truth. And the information that he shares with us is truth. And so the spiritual information that we were created, that the mind was created to consume, is truth. And when that spiritual information is truth, then through this pathway, the spirit, the mind, can control the functions of the body the way that it's supposed to, and it can result in proper function. But when it is lies or error that we take in, that has a different power. It has a different power. And when that different power is taken in by the spirit and made available to the cortex of the brain, it sends a different signal through the nerves to the various different parts of the body, and that can very much result in dysfunction. So, is it important what we think? Yes, it's hugely important, vastly important, right? Because it has a tremendous impact upon how things function in the body. But I wasn't told that in medical school. I didn't know that in medical school. It's not part of the education. Of course, you're not taught nutrition either. You're not taught that either. You're not taught lifestyle factors. You're not taught pretty much anything that's related to health. You're taught about disease and about trauma and surgery and other things of that nature. You're not actually taught about health. They're trying to change that. They're trying to get more, nutrition education and so on in medical schools, and I hope it continues in that direction, but still. So the mind and your thinking is not the only way that you have dysfunction in the body. You can have inheritance. Right? In inheritance, you have a blueprint, physical information in the form of genetic material. And that blueprint is passed on to you from a prior generation. And you get that blueprint, part of it from dad and part of it from mom, when you are how many cells? Only one cell. And from that one cell, you get 2 cells and 4 cells and so on and so forth. And all of your 50 to 100 trillion cells came from that one cell. So if there is a broken blueprint, how many cells have the broken blueprint? All of them do, right? They all do. So if it's truly an inheritance issue, you will find it manifesting in every cell that uses the broken part of the blueprint. And if it is a certain type of cell, it is every cell of that particular type, they are going to use the same parts of the blueprint. So if it's an inheritance issue, you will find it throughout all cells of a particular type. Sickle cell disease or sickle cell anemia. How many red blood cells does it affect? All of them, because they all use hemoglobin, and the blueprint to make the hemoglobin is broken. And so you can only make broken hemoglobin, and you find it in every red blood cell has a broken hemoglobin in it. It's not just one here, one there, a few there, and so on and so forth. It's everyone. If it's inheritance, it must be throughout all cells that use the broken blueprint. If you have a cancer that develops in this part of the colon, and then it starts growing from there and so on, is that inheritance? No, it's not. because there are other cells of the same type that aren't affected. Right? If that cannot be inheritance. If you end up with arthritis in certain joints and so on, that cannot be inheritance. Because in order for it to be inheritance, it must be throughout all cells that use that, use the broken gene. And so it's not going to be localized within a type of cell, it will be throughout those cells, wherever you find it. So part of what I have to evaluate for when I'm dealing with somebody with disease is to find out whether this is something that's localized inside of a particular type of cell or whether it's throughout all of those types of cells. And if it's throughout all of the types of cells and it started when somebody was little, because you have inheritance from when? Yeah, from conception. So it must be something that manifests from little and throughout all the types of cells. If it's not that, it's not inheritance. It's not. And for the most part, it's not. I mean, there are cases of inheritance, but for the most part, it's not. Now, not only inheritance, but different computer, different trackpad. You can have environment. And environment includes the temperature and the pressure and so on that your cells live in. You need a certain temperature, you need a certain pressure. If it's too much pressure, you smash things or you cut things. If you have too little pressure, it's like a vacuum. Or moxibustion. If anybody, yeah. Anyways, you get the mugwort and under the glass and you stick it on the back or somewhere and then you light it and then it goes, and it sucks all this skin up in there and then you pull the thing off later and you have this huge hickey. I won't admit that when I was younger, I used to play with a vacuum cleaner. Not the beater bar part of it, but you have the suction in and I would go, oh, that's really cool. I'm like, see how old it, and then I went, it just sucked the air right out of my lungs and I was like, whoa, But anyways, that causes trauma, damage, right? It's what happens when you get that hickey and whatever. It's the blood vessels have burst and now the blood's getting into the tissues, under the skin and so on. It causes damage. So trauma will cause damage and it will disrupt structure. And when it disrupts structure, then it disrupts the function associated with that structure. And trauma can be localized. You can hit one finger with the hammer and all the other fingers are okay. So it can cause a localized issue, but trauma will never create a new process. It doesn't create a new process. It just takes an existing process and disrupts it. And now there needs to be a healing process in order to try to restore. And if the trauma is too extensive, like you cut your arm off, well, the effect might be permanent, like you don't have an arm anymore, right? But the healing process should bring it to a place where if you didn't die, it's going to heal over, it's going to cover over, and you should not remain with pain permanently. If you have chronic long-term pain associated with the trauma, there's something else that's going on. That's not the trauma itself that's the cause. Yes, in the immediate, sure, sure. But in the long term, no. Then we blame chemicals. Right? So you can have what you need, but you have too little of it, or you have too much of it, or you have poisons or any things like that. So you have poisons, envenomations, toxicities, deficiencies. What these do, they don't create a new process. Just like trauma, it takes an existing process and cuts it off, or makes it so that it can't function. Because you don't have enough of the material you need to do it, or you have a poison that comes in and cuts off that pathway. Like if you got bit by, well, you don't have snakes around here, do you? Well, look at that.
There's one at the zoo.
Oh, there's one at the zoo. Okay, well, let's not let it have a mate and then get out. But so where we live, we have, you got to watch out for what ones that you have. And last year, one of our dogs got bitten by a copperhead. So it's a crotalid. That's one of the kinds where you have kind of the diamond-shaped head, and it has the prominent fangs. And the dog was messing with the snake, and then the snake bit the dog in the leg, and now the dog started having issues associated with that. And we ended up treating him for a couple days with charcoal, and then he got okay and whatever. But what the rattlesnakes they have a similar type of venom, and that venom gets to your clotting system, and it disrupts the blood clotting process so that you can't clot, and now you bleed out. And of course, the idea is to, get a mouse or a rat or something like that and cut off its blood clotting system, and it'll bleed out while it's trying to run away from the snake, and then it dies, and then the snake can go get it and eat it, and so on, right? So it doesn't create a new thing, it disrupts an existing thing that's there in the system. That's what poisons do. Now, if you have an individual that has gout, what's the cause of the gout? All right, uric acid. So you have somebody that has gout, they have high levels of uric acid in the joint, and when it becomes super concentrated, it crystallizes. And you can do this with, this is just a physical process. It's just, it's under law. You put too much of a crystalline type of substance in solution, and if you super concentrate it, it will begin to crystallize out of solution. And so that's what happens in the joint. And then it's very pokey, and so it pokes into the joint surfaces, and there's all sorts of inflammation. It's painful, it's horrible. And sometimes you'll come in and somebody will have the gout in their left toe, sometimes in the right toe, sometimes both toes, and and then if you treat it with medication, excuse me, to decrease the uric acid levels, then oftentimes the gout manifestation will go away. What causes this? All right, cholesterol, right? So we have high cholesterol levels, and it gets deposited, and you start developing a plaque, and the plaque starts going, and this is over years, sometimes decades, that you have this plaque development. Here you have somebody with left-sided male breast cancer, right? And males do get it. I had actually one of my professors in medical school, he had a mastectomy, for his breast cancer. Let me get a drink. There's a cause. So let's treat it. So we might say, okay, well, you have processed red meats. They're a class 1A carcinogen. And so if you're eating salami and bratwurst and hot dogs and these types of things, and you've been doing that for much of your life, and then now you develop this breast cancer over there. Okay. But the problem with this is diffusion, and this is the law as well. We've learned about this in chemistry class. You get some substance and you put it in a liquid environment, well, what's going to happen to it eventually? Yeah, it's going to distribute, and it's going to distribute relatively evenly through that liquid environment as long as it can absorb into that environment. And if you mix it, it happens faster, right? What happens in the cardiovascular system? Is there some mixing that happens? Well, yeah, very quickly. I mean, you got that heart that's going, and you got the blood that's going, and it mixes very quickly. And I don't care if it comes in through your digestive tract. I don't care if it comes in through your respiratory tract. I don't care if it comes in through your skin. It's going to get into the blood, and then it's going to circulate. So if I want to know how much uric acid is in your system because you have gout in your left toe, am I going to send you to the lab in order to get blood drawn from your toe? No. Where am I drawing blood from? Your hand, your arm. Does it matter if it's left-sided or right-sided where I'm getting it from? No, because the uric acid levels are essentially the same throughout the entire system. So you have the same uric acid levels going to the left foot as you're going to the right foot, but the problem's in the left foot. Why? Why? The answer cannot be the uric acid. Yes, the uric acid is there, but the answer cannot be the uric acid, because uric acid cannot have a party in the left great toe by itself. Something else has to be involved. Right? And you think of that plaque in the artery, it wasn't the cholesterol concentration in the blood the same here as it was there as it was there? Yeah. If it was a natural process, this is what you should see. This is the result of a natural process in a tube with flow going through the tube. That's not what you see. This is what you see. So is it the cholesterol? If you go down the beach and you see that, what do you conclude? Yeah. You don't conclude that the sand had a party and made a sandcastle. Now, can you have a sandcastle without sand? No, you can't. So you have to have the sand in order to have the sandcastle, but the sand didn't make the sandcastle. You had to have a sandcastle builder. And when you ate those animal proteins, didn't they go to the right breast just like they went to the left breast? Yeah. So why is the problem there and not there? Questions. And what happens if I think the problem is only chemical and all I try to do is deal with the chemicals? And I try to take, I get water to pour it on the sandcastle and make the sandcastle go away. Well, will the sandcastle go away? Yeah, it'll go away, sure. But did I take care of the sandcastle builder? No, I didn't. Chemicals are involved in the process for sure, but they're not the cause. They're only the cofactor. So, what is the sandcastle builder? What is it that can say, okay, we need uric acid concentrated there? What is it that can say, okay, we're going to concentrate cholesterol here? What is it that can say, okay, we're going to start, using those chemicals and do something over here, as opposed to other places? Yeah, that's the mind. Right? That's the mind. Because the mind has everything in the body represented in the mind, right? It's there. So every spot in the body, you have some nerve ending that's going to that spot. And that goes to a particular spot in the brain. And you have anywhere in your brain, you have connections to anywhere in the body. So if you're playing pin the tail on the donkey and you're the donkey, and you're blindfolded but you get pinned, well, you might not see it, but you know where they got you. Because the nervous system is set up in a very regulated way. So that it ends up in a particular place or it goes to a particular place. And guess what? You have a nerve that's going to that particular joint that doesn't go to other joints. And you have a signal that's being sent by and if that's the left great toe, then it's the upper inner portion of the right brain. And that signal is being sent via the different connections all the way down to that particular location. And now living cells in the area that are the only thing that can concentrate chemicals, because it has a selectively permeable membrane, and so it can pull things against concentration and concentrate it. Living cells are the only things that can do that. And the living cells in the area concentrate the uric acid, spit it into the joint, and now it becomes super concentrated, and now it crystallizes, and you have gout. And a nerve ending goes to that section of the artery that isn't in the other sections of the artery. And so you have a signal that's being sent from the mind to that particular location. And in response to that, it's picked up by cells that have high amounts of cholesterol in them. And they come to figure out what the signal is all about. And some of them die and they leave their payload of cholesterol behind. And as long as that signal remains, the process is going to continue. Yes, you can deal with the cholesterol and try to lower the cholesterol levels, and if you lower them to a certain amount, yeah, you can slow down or even stop the process because you just don't have the sand to work with, but did you take care of the sandcastle builder? No. And that tumor in the left breast, why is it on the left side? Well, there's a nerve that's going from the right brain over to that left breast and to that location. And it's bringing a signal. And we know that from all the way from cancer initiation all the way to metastasis, the nervous system is involved in every step along the way. Every step. There's research to show it's involved in every step along the way. And if you cut that tumor, the nerve going to the center of the tumor changes how it behaves. Interesting. And the mind, of course, you can have generalized type of responses associated with it, like your fight or flight response. It just affects all of physiology like that. Or it can be very localized, right here in this artery, or right here in that tissue, or right there. It can manifest. Right? And 90% of the time, we find that the mind is where you're going to find the origin of the issue. Yes, there's inheritance. Yes, there's environment. Sure, chemicals are involved, but 90% of the time it's going to be in the mind. And finally, there's the enemy. In the case of Job, he had boils from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. It wasn't an issue of his mind. It wasn't an issue of inheritance. It wasn't a chemical issue. And it wasn't a bacteria issue either. It's not that he got methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus or something like that was going on in that time. It was the enemy that gave it to him. And I don't care how many antibiotics you would have given to him, it wouldn't have resolved the issue because that wasn't the cause. Yes, infection involves microorganisms, but let me ask you this question. Are microorganisms the cause of the infection? Yeah, they're involved, but are they the cause? No. No. Right. So, these are things that doctors don't know about disease and things that we need to consider as we go through this weekend. Tomorrow we're going to be here at 10. Was it 10? 10 o'clock. I'll be here beginning, and we're going to continue this journey together as we consider some other things. It's not only what doctors don't know about disease, but it's also what psychiatrists don't know about you, and so on. We need to understand more about this mind. And what scientists don't know about you, we need to understand more about the spirit. And we need to understand how these things function and come together so that we can understand, why am I doing what I'm doing? Because oftentimes we don't know. And we need to get it figured out so that we can be well. But let me pray with you so that you can run away and get your rest. And then we can be back here again tomorrow. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your blessings. Thank you that you are such a wonderful God. Lord, open our eyes and help us to see what we need to see. And Lord, if there is prior information that we have had, well, help us to evaluate it and determine whether it can actually fit or not. And if there's new information that we need to take and we need to consider, Lord, help us in the considering process. And Lord, not only in relation to disease, but as this weekend we go through in relation to relationships and our spiritual life and our mental health, Lord, help us to see what we need that we might be truly free. And this I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.